Good evening. Goeienaand, goeiemorgen. Dumelang bagaetsho. Modimo a le hlohonolofatse. Thank you very much for tuning in tonight, and thank you for being faithfully following what we are saying as the ACDP leadership. As you know that I'm not alone, my co-pilot, my co-host, Honorable Wayne Thring, will be joining us later tonight. I'm going to start alone for the first few minutes because I will have to leave you in his good hands, as I have to be part of a program that will be recording exactly the same time as we are studying this live stream, where political parties, Christian political parties, are invited to tell the nation why Christians have so many different political parties, why we are not one. Who is dividing who? Is the ACDP dividing known available Christian parties, or are they the ones, as the ones who are starting later than ACDP, who are dividing the body of Christ? We will be looking at that tonight. But I want to say, before I hand over to my colleague, one of the important things is that we have to stand strong, stand for what the Lord has called us to do. This morning, 5:20, I was on radio SAFM, the community radio, but in vernacular. The question that was asked this morning is, what do we think about the latest public protector's report about Phala Phala? Phala Phala. We know that the president owns Phala Phala. It is his farm. And we also know that $4 million, not rands, but US dollars, were found hidden in the couch on his farm. Now, obviously, members of parliament, including the ACDP, asked questions. How did that money end up on that farm? Was that money declared? And we know by now that SAR said that money was not declared. He knew nothing about it. So the public protector was requested to investigate, how did that money end there? Why is the president not saying anything about it? When the president is asked questions, his mom doesn't want to talk about it. Obviously, we are shocked that the report that came from the acting public protector stated that the president has done nothing wrong. President done nothing wrong, acquitted. Who did wrong? The head of his protection services, General Rudy. Okay. What that general did, did he do it without the president's instruction? Follow the train? Follow the people who stole the money? Up to Namibia. He could never have done it without the president knowing. You could never have done it without an instruction and permission from the president to find out who the thieves are. But the big question remains, how did that money end up there? The president does not want to talk about it, and we are shocked to hear that the president is innocent. I'm sure majority of South Africans, except those obviously who are defending the president, there are some who are employed to lie, to deceive, and to cover up for the mistakes of the president. Let it be known that ACDP believes that the president has something to be involved or to account about this. Remember that a panel of Section 89 panel was formed, okay, to investigate. We know that it was led by a respected retired judge, Sandile Ngcobo. And when he released his report, the Honorable Sandile Ngcobo, the justice, said the president has and has to answer for what has happened. Surely the president must answer. Now we hear the public protector, the acting public protector saying the president has nothing to answer. Friends, this is nothing but a cover-up. I personally believe that money that came from the $4 million came in a briefcase, was given to the president to be part of something that is hidden, but that I can tell you is going to be revealed one day. So the president has a case to answer. It does not matter what the acting public protector is saying, the president has a case to answer. So this matter is not going to be left alone. The president must answer. We are going to take this matter, even going to the elections campaigning, we will raise this matter. There is a cover-up. Is our judicial system honest and fair to everybody? I don't think so. This is one great example. Now, what has been trending in the media today is something that happened last night in Gauteng. The bodyguards of the current Deputy President Mashatile were seen assaulting people on the freeway. One was unfortunately pulled out of the car, dragged to the side, and the poor man was kicked, assaulted, slapped, and many other things. Now the question is, do bodyguards have the right, whether they are the presidents or the deputy presidents, do they have the right to take the law into their own hands? If those people or that person who was assaulted made a mistake, why didn't they arrest him? They didn't arrest him. They just were showing off their power, their authority. They are above the law because they are protecting the president and the deputy president. There's been a debate on radio. Some are saying those guys must be arrested, those guys must apologize, those guys must be investigated. And some are saying, why should they apologize when they were protecting the president or deputy president? Some are saying the deputy president himself must apologize. Some are saying he has nothing to apologize for. I, for one, believe the deputy president of South Africa must apologize for what his staff members, his bodyguards have done to the member of the public. I repeat, if he was in the wrong, that poor man that was assaulted, he should be arrested. That's why the law says he should be arrested. Who gives the bodyguards the permission to kick people because they made a mistake or whatever they've done? They have no right. And I'm sure you agree with me. So you respond and tell us what should have been done. Should this matter be allowed to be swept under the carpet, die just naturally? Nobody says anything about it? I think not. With Phala Phala, authorities have covered for the president. Now it's the deputy president's bodyguards. It's not him personally on this matter, it's his bodyguards. Is he going to be left alone? I think he's also going to be covered. And now he must know that the ACDP says, Deputy President, you must apologize on behalf of your staff members, your security personnel. If my children make a mistake, well, I expect my children to apologize, and I also will apologize on behalf of my children. If my staff make a mistake, my staff must apologize, and I will also apologize on behalf of my staff. That's taking responsibility. But we are led by people who don't take responsibility for their actions, responsibility for their mess. Okay, that is what we are thinking in the ACDP, and that's what my thoughts are. Now, people have been asking questions about this moonshot pact. Some are saying, ACDP, why don't you clap together and get the ANC out of office? Well, let me ask you a question before I respond to that. The question is, if you have 10 parties coming together to oppose the ANC, whose policies are they going to promote? Whose policies are going to promote? If the ACDP become part of them, are we going to be allowed to promote ACDP policies? Or Are we expected to promote what all these people have agreed about? I think not. If you remember correctly, when the one who's coordinating this Moonshot Pact, Honorable Steenhuisen, was presenting the vision about this Moonshot Pact, one of the things he said was, the donors, the funders expect us to work together. The donors expect us to work together. Now the question is, if they expect us to work together, or they expect opposition parties to work together, will the opposition parties who are in part of this pact be promoting their party policies, be promoting and defending and working and representing South Africans? Or will they be stating what the donors want to hear? Are they pushing the interest of South Africans, of the interest of people who are outside South Africa? Now, obviously, I made it clear that the ACDP is not part of this pact, and it's not going to be, we are not going to change our mind and be part of this pact. Now, we have been invited. Hopingly, they said, maybe we'll change our minds along the way. So, my deputy, capable deputy, Honorable, you know him, my Honorable Wayne Thring, has been attending these meetings as an observer. Okay? So he is going to tell us more. What has been happening in these meetings? Is his opinion being changed? Does he think the ACDP is going to change our mind? That is something that he is going to tell us about. So I'm going to make space for our Deputy President, ACDP Deputy President, and say, my colleague, please tell us what has been happening in these meetings that you are attending on our behalf. So please welcome the ACDP Deputy President, Wayne Thring. Welcome, my brother. Welcome, sir. Welcome, dear friend. The Lord bless you as you take us forward and tell our members what has been happening in those meetings. Over to you, Deputy President.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Covering some pertinent issues in South Africa that South Africa is currently facing. From a very cold Western Cape, having traveled down to Western Cape just this afternoon from Durban, a warm Durban, like a summer Durban. But you raised some pertinent issues with regards to the Phala Phala scandal and the acting public protector's position in clearing the president. I've also had a few interviews and just had one earlier this evening with the radio station, where clearly I think that the issues and the points that you raised, which raise concern about the public protector's findings, I too raised those particular concerns, and the ACDP very clearly will continue to pursue this matter, like we did with the former president, Mr. Jacob Zuma, in holding him to account. We will continue to pursue the matter with regards to our current president, Mr. Ramaphosa, in holding him account. It is our fiduciary responsibility as well as our constitutional responsibility to hold the executive to account. So, President, thank you for raising those key issues, as well as the Deputy President's Protection Service, bodyguards, and the unruly behavior that was displayed just over the past few days. The Moonshot Pact, President, as you indicated, we attend those particular meetings as observers. So I think that, as you indicated, it must be very clear. And I know that some newspapers and other media outlets have indicated that the ACDP is also a part of the Moonshot Pact. But very clearly our position, when we did join, and we joined much later, in fact, we weren't even given an invitation to the first meeting, but joined maybe the second or third meeting that was held. And in those meetings, I made it very clear that the ACDP is there as an observer to listen, as an observer to not to make and to be honest, President, I haven't even spoken in terms of offering solutions, way forward, with regards to the discussions, because my position there has been that of an observer. If you are there as a fully fledged member of this particular pact, then you begin to contribute and offer advice in terms of way forward and so on. But because my mandate is to go to observe, that's exactly what I've done, and I've made it very clear to the leaders that were there, and obviously. The indication is, well, we hope that at some stage that the ACDP will become a part of, a fully fledged part of the Moonshot Pact. And I said, well, that decision is a decision that will be taken by the leadership of the ACDP. But in those meetings, essentially what was discussed, one was the unhappiness with the name Moonshot Pact. And the reason why there was unhappiness was because they say that the name itself is a DA name, and so if that name is kept, it would essentially mean that that this is a DA initiative. But whether you change the name or not, I think everybody knows that it is essentially a DA initiative. I think we also need to understand that we all attended the initiative by General Bantu Holomisa, where he also looked at parties coming together in preparation for 2024 with a common interest, and to see how we could look at working together. And these kinds of relationships were there. How do we work together, for example, on election day to make sure that votes are not stolen from the opposition? How do we keep an eye out for each other? So these are things that have been there over the years. And so General Holomisa from the UDM called this particular meeting. The DA was a part of that meeting as well, which was held in Cape Town, looking at how can opposition parties work together. The DA subsequently then went and indicated that they want to run it, and this is their initiative. So we've been there essentially as observers. So there was unhappiness with the name, but essentially the terms of reference, how is this going to operate? When is the convention going to take place? Where is the convention going to take place? Who are the speakers going to be at the convention? And those speakers would essentially be given some meat, some flesh, adding some flesh to this particular pact heading to 2024. So those essentially, I've been to about 2 or 3 of those meetings as an observer, and essentially it's been around the logistics, and obviously with the intention that should a situation prevail where the ANC falls below the 50% mark and opposition parties are able to come together, what is that going to look like? So these are still talks about talks, and I think much of it will be fleshed out at the convention that they're having. But very clearly, the position of the ACDP is that we are observers. We are not a part of the Moonshot Pact. In fact, our press release made it also very clear what our position was, our unhappiness also that we expressed in the manner in which this was advertised and spoken of without informing the political parties, without informing the leaders of the political parties about the intention. So I think our press release has made it very clear in terms of our position. So colleagues and friends, we do have, I believe, also waiting in the wings, our member of parliament, and I'm not sure if he's there, but he may have some challenges also with load shedding. We have the Honorable Steve Swart, and one of our colleagues, one of the longest standing members in the Justice Portfolio Committee, the most experienced in the Justice Portfolio Committee. And this is the caliber of leadership that the ACDP has in Parliament. So he's also just come back from a study tour. And our president raised the issue, the president of the ACDP raised the question of how beneficial are these study tours? Is there implementation? And so our Honourable Member of Parliament, Steve Swart, is going to speak to us around his study tour and what benefit can be derived from it, if any. Steve, welcome, and good to have you back in the country again.
Thank you, Deputy President. And really, it's wonderful to be on the show. And it's just so wonderful to hear the inspiring words of our president and your inspiring words that we need godly governance in our country. That is what we need. And that is what we are striving for. That is what we've stood for. And it's been an honor to continue to serve our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and the ACDP leadership in Parliament. So yes, Deputy President, it was an honor to be part of the leadership of Parliament to visit two countries, and that is as the Whippery of Parliament, to visit Ireland and Kenya, to look at how their parliaments operate and to see what we can learn as South African Parliament in a number of areas, and particularly how the Whippery operates, how the committee systems operate, how Parliament operates, how Parliament holds the executive to account, and a few interesting aspects alluding to what you spoke about on the Moonshot Pact, how the other parliaments deal with coalitions and how they deal with independent candidates, because that's going to be something new that we faced with in the 2024 elections. Can I just at the outset say that we as the ACDP are very disappointed that the Zondo Commission recommendations, particularly pertaining to what Parliament should do, has taken far too long to be implemented. You'll remember, the viewers will remember, that we as the ACDP played a key role in looking into state capture and corruption with Eskom, with the SABC, and a lot of those recommendations from the parliamentary inquiry went across to the Zondo Commission, and they came out with a damning indictment of Parliament that Parliament did not sufficiently exercise its oversight to prevent state capture. And the Zondo Commission brought out a number of recommendations of how to improve the committee systems, improve holding the executive to account, improve how members of Parliament can stand up even against their own party political line, and of course the whole issue of how one elects the president, direct elections. And so it was helpful for us as the Whippery of all political parties, main political parties in Parliament, to visit two countries that have a similar Westminster-style Parliament with a constitution, and that was the Republic of Ireland and Kenya. Deputy President, what we found very interesting in Ireland was the fact that they have independent candidates, they have got coalition governments, and of course we as the ACDP are trusting for a godly government, let's just emphasize that, and they have come from a deeply divisive background. South Africa played a role in the Northern Ireland peace, the Good Friday peace arrangements. We're talking now about Southern Ireland, which is the Republic of Ireland. What is very interesting there is that there was a war against the then British in 1921. In 1922, there was a negotiated settlement giving independence to the Republic of Ireland. There was a civil war in 1922. And despite that, the Irishmen have come together. Yes, there's still issues in Northern Ireland, but they've come together and established an independent Republic of Ireland. What is interesting is that two parties, and I'm just looking up at my notes, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, they were the two almost opposing parties, are now working together to keep out a very what they believe is a very militant party, or a very far left-wing party, and that is the Sinn Féin party. And so what we learned was parties that would previously not work together are working together to keep out a far more dangerous party. And obviously, those are lessons that we can apply. What I found particularly interesting was the rich spiritual heritage of Ireland as well, with St. Patrick, with the prayers, with a lot of, and of course there's religious strife there between Protestants and Catholics that arose a lot, but that they have come to a sense of working together. And Ireland, as we know, economically is booming. And so it brings great hope for us as South Africans to look at another nation and to see they've been through deep darkness. But despite that, they have come out, the economy is growing, they've got hardly any levels of unemployment, and political parties that would previously not work together are working together now to keep out certain parties which they believe would cause devastation to Ireland. So that was the lesson, amongst many other lessons. And it must be emphasized that when one gets back from such a study tour, a full report is produced of lessons learned, and that report is then tabled in Parliament for consideration and for what lessons can South Africans learn from that issue. Deputy President, a very interesting aspect there was that there's a lot of litigation against members of Parliament by citizens there. And if you, in South Africa, we accept we've got parliamentary privilege. So if we say something in Parliament, we are protected from litigation. There we have found that despite the same provisions protecting members of Parliament from what they say in Parliament, they still have litigation against members of Parliament, and the courts are even digging into that privilege and saying it is not absolute. So that was a very important lesson for us to learn as South African Parliament, that there are cases internationally where that privilege, where members of Parliament would say possibly outrageous statements in Parliament, and they are protected by parliamentary privilege, and there the courts are looking into that as well. Then we came back, and then we went to Kenya, which was a very, very interesting experience. It's my second visit to the Kenyan Parliament. We can learn as South Africans. We always need to remember we can learn from other parliaments. Often we go to other African countries and we seem like the big brother, and we are coming there. And basically, when we come with a humble heart and want to learn from our African brothers, it is really encouraging. And we were warmly received in the Kenyan Parliament. But there were some very, very interesting aspects that we learned there. I think what is also important to emphasize is that both countries have a constituency-based system. They do not have the proportional list system that we have in South Africa, where all votes are put together. They have the system that you'd have like at local government level, where you have a ward councillor. There you have it at a national level. You'll have a constituency-based system. So the members of Parliament hold much greater sway there. In Kenya, your members of Parliament from a constituency are given millions of rands, and they can build schools. They can build roads. And that empowers your members of Parliament a lot more. Obviously, there's the element of corruption as well. So that is a balance that needs to be struck. What is also very interesting in the Kenyan example is that the executive, the president, does not appear in Parliament. And he is directly elected. Their ballot, they have 6 ballot sheets. The president only comes to Parliament once a year for the State of the Nation address. The rest of the time, he is largely unaccountable to Parliament. So there we were able to share a little bit about parliamentary oversight over the executive. What was also very interesting was the issue of how independent candidates are dealt with both in Ireland and in Kenya. In Ireland, we met with a number of the independents, and 1 or 2 of them, it was interesting, they seemed to have been disciplined by their parties, and then had stood as independent candidates and had been elected. What I found in Kenya, we met with some of the parties, and they said independent candidates in Nairobi largely align themselves either with the governing party, the majority party, or with the minority party. There are one or two that stand independently, but mostly they would apply along those lines of, and I see we've just had a bit of a power issue this side, but I have always got something on standby. So I hope that's fine. But Deputy President, so when it came to the issue of discussing the issues of independent candidates, it was very interesting to see to what degree they were effective. Now, I think the mere fact that they have to stand in a constituency and win a constituency distinguishes that from, I like that comment. I like that comment, Roddy. Thank you so much. And again, that is why we need godly governance. Just on a quick aside here, load shedding has devastated our economy, and it is largely, majorly due to ANC misgovernance. We've got all the information. The State Capture Commission came out, the Zondo Commission came out and said it was the ANC. And the president himself, Ramaphosa, said the ANC is accused number one. And so load shedding must be laid squarely at the door of the ANC. Getting back to Kenya, what was very interesting there was the whole issue of how coalitions govern the country. They form coalitions in the run-up to elections, and they have got legislation that governs how coalitions should be operated and how they should be formed. And that was a very interesting insight, and it's something we can learn from as well. We learned that you can enter coalitions in the run-up to elections. They must be registered. A coalition agreement must be registered with the Registrar of Political Parties. And after elections, those agreements can be renegotiated. They can be started anew. So there's two processes: before elections and after elections. And that was very insightful as well. What we found very interesting with the whole issue of the accountability of members of parliament in Kenya are held at a very high regard. They are paid exceptionally well, maybe one could even argue excessively, but that is the Kenyan example, because they want their public representatives to be beyond reproach. But of course, like any country, I think there is still elements of corruption. I read in the newspapers of allegations of corruption, and one can see that the Kenyan model is working to a certain degree, but we can learn from one another. They have a very effective parliamentary budget office, which assists the parliamentarians in holding the executive to account. But now the deficiency there is the executive largely do not appear in parliament. So whilst we were there, they were discussing a very controversial finance bill, which the majority party, together with its coalition, managed to push through parliament. Now, Deputy President, that debate, we would have in South Africa, we'd have a debate of about 2 hours. That debate went on for 3 days. 3 days. It was unbelievable. 3 days to conclude that and to conclude, and every member was given the opportunity to speak, and there was lengthy debates. And what we can learn from that as well is there wasn't limits to the amount of speaking time that each representative could have. And that's why the debates went on for a number of days. So I think, Deputy President, we learned a lot from visiting these two countries. I think it will assist us in implementing what the Zondo Commission recommended about improving parliamentary oversight, which has been sorely lacking. Basically, in my view, the majority party, the ANC, is largely rubber stamps what the executive is doing, save for a few exceptions. And I think what we've learned is that there are models we can learn from. Traveling overseas, it definitely warrants the expenses, that we can learn from best practices. And in so doing, we were able to share our experiences, such as the virtual parliaments that we hold. Now, Ireland holds virtual parliaments, but their constitution requires them to physically be in parliament to vote. So they can't vote like we do on a virtual platform.
Mm.
In Kenya, largely, they meet physically. And it was interesting to learn how they dealt with COVID-19 and those issues. But just to conclude, Deputy President, just to thank you again for the opportunity to share. And it was wonderful for us to be on the global stage as the ACDP, introduced at every meeting as the Christian party from South Africa. Steve Swart, one of the longest serving members of parliament, and that was by the leader of the delegation, which was the chief whip of the majority party. So with those few words, just to thank you again, to thank our viewers for their support and prayers for us in the ACDP as we stand for righteousness, for justice, and we move towards the 2024 elections with great courage, great fortitude, knowing that there's a sovereign God who rules in the affairs of man and that we will succeed. One with God is a majority. Thank you so much, Deputy President.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Steve. Thank you for the feedback. Thank you also for representing the ACDP with the spirit of excellence, like all of the ACDP MPs and MPLs and councillors do. This is what we expect. We expect our ACDP public office bearers to do no other than that which they would do as a service unto the Lord. And so we want to thank you also for the work that you've done and for representing the ACDP in Ireland, Southern Republic of Ireland, as well as in Kenya. So the Lord bless you and thank you for that. So very clearly, I think one of the challenges that we've actually had, and we're going to be asking Josh, maybe if we could start looking also at just some of the comments. We could look at some of the comments and thereafter we would be just going into the next segment and some of the other aspects that we're going to touch. You know, the president's an election, Corinne, an election of justice. Okay, I think very clearly this is what South Africa needs. I think, remember, justice is one of the pillars of the foundation of God's throne. Interesting model, Raymond Tlaeli of Kenyan Coalitions, Honorable Swart. So Steve, as Raymond, our TD indicating that's an interesting model, and very clearly I think that it certainly is. We have Kaz from KZN, South Coast. Thank you for the informative information, ever learning, and that's so true. We have to be a people that are ever learning. Anyone who says that they know it all certainly needs to go back to school. Corinne says a true man of God made reference to the strategic alignment. War is strategic. His words so resonated with me. Corinne, thank you. Thank you for those words. Sarah, thank you so much, Mr. President and honorable ministers, for these live meetings. We are grateful and blessed to learn from all the knowledge shared. Our absolute pleasure, Sarah, and thank you so much also for being a part of what we do on these Tuesdays now, which used to be Wednesdays. We also spoke on, the president touched on the Phala scandal, and I must reiterate when looking at the Phala scandal that when former President Jacob Zuma was found wanting, the ACDP was at the forefront. We participated in the marches. We participated together with the opposition parties in calling for the then President, Mr. Jacob Zuma, to be held to account and to answer to Parliament. There was an ad hoc committee that was established at Parliament, and I think our Honourable Steve Swart was a part of the delegation that actually went to Nkandla to see whether the swimming pool was a swimming pool or a fire pool. As the cabinet ministers had indicated that no, this actually wasn't a swimming pool that was built with public funds, it was actually a fire pool. And so members of Parliament actually went and did their own investigation. And when the saga of Phala Phala came up, I think very clearly the position of the ACDP was a principled position. This is not about personalities. It's a principled position, and it's a principled position of equality in law, that everyone in South Africa is equal before the law, and that there's no one individual, there's no one in the country that is above the law, whether it's the president, whether it's the CEO of a particular company, cabinet ministers, members of parliament. No one individual is above the law. And so based on that particular principle, it is the ACDP has been calling for Mr. Ramaphosa to be held to account. And we will continue to do so. We will continue to see and push for justice to be done in South Africa, and that every individual in this country must be held accountable where there is prima facie evidence, as the Section 89 panel, which is a panel that looks into the possibility of an impeachment process to the president. And this particular Section 89 panel found that indeed the president had a case to answer and needs to be held to account. And sadly, the ruling party formed a logger, like they did with former President Jacob Zuma. They formed the logger against around the president and voted against the recommendations that came from the former Chief Justice Ngobo, recommending that the president be held to account. So this is a case. This is an injustice to many South Africans, and clearly the Section 89, the rejection of the recommendation from Section 89 by the ruling party is an injustice to South Africa and to South Africans. And the second injustice is, we believe, the findings of the acting public protector. And we, within the ACDP, will continue to fight for justice in the country, irrespective of, without fear, favor, or prejudice, irrespective of who it is that actually holds office. So our president, Reverend Dr. Kenneth Meshwe, raised this particular issue in his introduction, and just wanted to reaffirm our position as the ACDP with regards to the Phala Phala scandal. Now, sadly, and I want to raise this particular point, we lost a councillor, and we again wish to offer our condolences to the Myaka family from Nseleni in the northern parts of KwaZulu-Natal, on the outskirts of Richards Bay, in the Hlatuze municipality. Our councillor, Pastor Councillor John Myaka, while preaching in his church last week, Tuesday, was shot. The witnesses indicated that there were some men that gathered outside, 2 or 3 men that gathered outside at the entrance to the church where he was preaching, Seda Family Church, and one of them walked into the church and began firing at the pastor, at our councillor. About 3 or 4 shots were fired, and the pastor fell to the floor, and then he proceeded to the pulpit area and continued firing to make sure that he didn't survive. Clearly, this also speaks to crime that is so rampant within the country. KwaZulu-Natal has one of the highest murder rates. But if we look at the murder rates in the country as a whole, some 6,200 murders were committed just within the first 3 months of 2023. So within the first 3 months, some 6,200 murders were committed. When one looks at this as compared to, by the way, that 6,200 murders that were committed was an increase, an over 3% increase of the same period last year. So very clearly, crime in South Africa is on the increase. We must remember that when we had the Scorpions had a conviction rate of some 90 to 95%. So those whom they arrested, 90 to 90, the cases were so tight that 90 to 95% of those arrested by the Scorpions were convicted and sentenced, had prison sentences. South African Police Services, on the other hand, has a conviction rate of about 10 to 15%. When President Jacob Zuma came into power, one of the first things that he did was change the Scorpions to the Hawks, and then place the Scorpions that had a 95% conviction rate under South African Police Services that had a 10 to 15% conviction rate. And so very clearly, what we are now seeing with regards to the increases in violent crime in South Africa is as a result of the policies, the failed policies of the ruling party. I want to encourage you to go and have a look at the ACDP's crime fighting policies, the ACDP's crime fighting strategy. And if one looks at that, what the ACDP is saying, zero tolerance for crime, zero tolerance. Those who commit murder, those who commit rape, no bail. As a starter, no bail. Those who are sentenced, that your prisons cannot become like hotels, where prisoners are treated better than the vast majority of South Africans. Where in South Africa currently, 25% of South Africans go to bed hungry every day, 25%. And that statistic is increasing. It's increasing because during the COVID period, with the harsh lockdowns that we had, some 3 million people lost their jobs. South Africa currently has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world, with the IMF indicating that within the next year or so, unemployment, which is currently sitting at about 32.8%, could go up to about 35%. On the expanded definition of unemployment, we could actually be seeing unemployment reaching over 50%. The expanded definition includes, so the narrow definition excludes those who have given up looking for work. But the expanded definition includes those who have given up looking for work. And so very clearly, the challenges that we have with regards to crime continue to touch almost every sector of society. You may have heard of a 10-year-old schoolgirl whose body was found on the rugby field. I think it was this morning. And police are investigating a 10-year-old murdered and her body dumped on a rugby field of a school. And this is what many South Africans are having to face. On the same day that our councillor, Mnyaka, was murdered in his church, an 18-year-old on his way to school in the Wentworth area was brutally murdered and shot. In KwaZulu-Natal, we've also had in the hostels, just outside of Glibland's hostel, outside of Umlazi, we had about 8 people that were gunned down in one incident at the hostels. Not long after that, in Pietermaritzburg, we had about 10 people that were gunned down. And the Minister of Police, Bheki Cele, visited the families and the area, condemning the killing and calling for a cleansing, to call on the ancestors for a cleansing to stop the bloodshed and the violence. The position of the ACDP is what we should be calling for is a period of prayer we should be calling South Africans to a time of prayer, a time of fasting, a convocation where we come together as South Africans and call upon the only true God to intervene on behalf of our land. South Africans, in terms of some of the policies that we have, particularly with the ruling party, by and large, has turned their backs on God with the policies that we have passed, with some of the legislation that we have passed. And these legislation pieces that have been passed seem to indicate that we don't need God. But within the ACDP, what we are saying is that what we should be calling for is for a period of prayer, a period of fasting, where we come together and we call upon God like we did pre-1994, when everybody prophesied and spoke about bloodshed that was coming to South Africa. It was the believers in the country that came together. Hundreds of thousands across the land came together, prayed, and sought the face of God to prevent bloodshed from coming upon our land. And God heard our prayer. And so very clearly, this is what South Africa needs. And so the crime statistics are telling. The crime statistics is an indication that South Africa is a nation that is at war with itself. I think I indicated in one of our previous programs that we have more people that die from murder in South Africa than those that die in the war between Russia and Ukraine. And the only way for this to change, is when you have a government that has the will to hold those accountable, to bring them to book, to ensure that the law of the land is applied, as I said, without favor, without prejudice. It is applied equally, without fear. And one of the challenges that we have in South Africa is the fact that the law within the country appears not to be applied equally. And one of the reasons why we have such rampant crime is because those who are the perpetrators of crime get away with it. And there's the sense that, well, I have a more than 90 to 98% chance of getting away with the crime, and so I'll take my chances. It cannot be on our watch that this is allowed. And so I want to encourage you to interrogate the ACDP's crime policies and look at the crime policies, that when we have a government like the ACDP, that these particular policies are policies that will be applied, that will deal firmly with the criminals in our country, that the criminals will know that they need to fear the law, that they need to fear the crime fighting units within South Africa, your criminal justice system, and that the criminal justice system must be seen to be working, where we don't have cases that are dragged on for years and years, like the Senzo case, where it seems as if now the judge in that particular case is going to be changed, and the case has to be started all over again, years after being dragged on for so many years. And so we have to have a criminal justice system that works. So we'd love to hear your comments. Also, as I said, the fact that crime, and maybe we'll touch on how crime affects so many other sectors within society. And before closing, I'll just touch on that for a while. So Tommy Emmanuel says, it is clear that our constitution has been compromised. We need the ACDP to restore the integrity our country once had. Tony Manuel. Tony's so accurate. You've really condensed that. The ACDP is needed. We have Raymond Tlaeli. Indeed, DP, Minister Cele and the ANC's crime-fighting strategies failed dismally. It is time for the ACDP to assume government, because if not, South Africa is in trouble. And we just wish that this message, Mr. Clearly, this message would go out. If we don't have the ACDP in government, South Africa is in trouble. Moses Pui, very true, DP, zero tolerance. Our kids cannot afford tertiary education while perpetrators enjoy full benefits of our taxes. Moses, absolutely. We can't have the reverse, where the perpetrators of injustice are treated better than law-abiding citizens. Olga Mapanga, law-abiding citizens must be protected by all means. We cannot live in fear in our own country. Godly governance is needed. 2024 elections, vote right and vote ACDP. Olga, absolutely. The ACDP is the way to vote. Marike Neatling, criminals currently have more rights than law-abiding citizens. They are more free to walk our streets than our children have to be kids and play without fear. This is one of the tragedies. This is one of the travesties of justice, that our children now have to become prisoners within the four walls of their homes, or play only within the parameters of the boundaries of their homes, and unable to be free as children, to play with the neighbors and to play in the parks, and even our parks. I know that within some of the communities that I engage in, our parks are taken over. They're taken over by the criminals themselves. That is where drugs are exchanged. That is where some of the fights take. That is where some of the crime takes place. And so some of the places that are supposed to be safe for our children have become war zones. I indicated that I wanted to also touch on just some of the statistics, some of the financial statistics. Crime affects also your economy, and very clearly, South Africa needs both direct investment, that's domestically, where businesses are able to invest and grow their businesses within the country, and we need our locals to expand and to grow and to create wealth in South Africa. We also need foreign direct investment, where investment can come from the outside, where your multinationals and your other businessmen and women who see South Africa as a potential place to invest are able to come in. But how are they able to come and invest where crime currently is so rampant, where South Africa is now being seen as one of the crime capitals of the world? Business will not come to invest where you have such a high rate of crime being committed within the country. Very clearly, there are two things that businesses that motivate and that are functions of where business invest. The one is the interest rate. Business will always move from a high interest climate to a low interest climate. And secondly, they will move from a high crime rate to a low, where there's a low crime rate. So these are two functions which determine, two characteristics which determine where businesses go. And currently, South Africa is not being seen as a favored destination. We have some of our northern neighbors that are now outstripping South Africa, outshining South Africa as a favored destination for investment, purely also because of the policies that our country has initiated, as well as the challenge that we have with regards to crime. So if we look at some of what in economics that they call the snowball effect. So the snowball effect impacts on crime, the snowball effect of, impacts on the economy, snowball effect of crime, impacts on the economy. Crime impacts the economy in the sense that it damages the economy. When the economy is damaged, that increases unemployment. And then you have the multiplier effect. When the huge unemployment, huge crime, it then begins to affect almost every other sector. You do not have the necessary resources that are needed, where even domestically there's no investment, because businesses now that could invest in South Africa will rather invest in our northern neighbors in Africa, where it's safer and where there's going to be a greater return on the investment. And so there's this just a multiplier effect that continues to see a decline in the economy. Currently in South Africa, what we have in the country is a very high debt to GDP, a debt to GDP of some 70.17, over 70%, indicating that we are heading towards a potential fiscal cliff, off the fiscal cliff, where South Africa may not be able to pay its debt in the outer line years. If debt to GDP continues to increase, where South Africa continues to borrow because crime is out of control. Now, how do we arrest these challenges? How do we ensure that we have an economy that is working? How do we ensure that we have an education system that is functional? How do we ensure that we have a health system that is functional, that our people are able to go to public hospitals and get quality treatment? How do we ensure that when our children go into the streets, that our children are safe? Well, I present to you that it is through the ACDP and voting for the ACDP. I want to conclude tonight as we wrap up and say that South Africa needs the ACDP. South Africa cannot do without the ACDP. And the ACDP needs you. And so come 2024, won't you give your support and vote to the ACDP? If not, as our colleague Raymond Tlaeli indicated, then South Africa is in trouble. But we can get South Africa out of trouble if we vote for the ACDP. Well, God bless you, and thank you again for joining in. Thanks to our president also for giving me this opportunity to, as his co-pilot, to steer the ship for the rest of the evening. And we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you, and God bless you for joining us. Good night.